Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm your host, Dr. Haider Shah. On behalf of Colwas, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we have another very interesting topic, and I'm really honored to welcome and introduce our distinguished guest speaker who is going to talk about the writing a review article, systematic literature review versus scoping review. Sometimes we get confused while hearing the term systematic review and scoping review, and we are not sure what is the exactly meaning or difference between them, or is there any difference between them really exist or not. So you will get the best insight, right information, knowledge and guidance about it, because we have an expert today with us in this session. So stay tuned, because an amazing stuff are coming ahead in this session. So before we start, I would like to thank the Kalwas for arranging such enlightenment sessions, for their support and providing such a wonderful platform. The aim of the Kalwas is to give you the opportunity to interact with the world-renowned speakers, teachers, authors, researchers, experts, professionals, and businessmen to share their views, experiences, and tips which will create an impact and will enable you to learn new things and develop yourself in order to grow individually as well as to contribute to the world at large. As our slogan is, come, learn, and share knowledge. So today we have a very special guest. He is a well known personality in academia and industry. He has a vast experience. We always see him on different platforms while contributing to the field and world. Moreover, through his great knowledge and wisdom, people are getting the right guidance and knowledge. Above everything, he always extends a helping hand and share his knowledge. So let me introduce him formally. He is adjunct professor of tourism management. He is adjunct professor of tourism management in the Sustainable Research Center, University of Sunshine Coast, Queensland, and the Edith Cowan University, Western Australia. His research interests include the study of tourism experiences, destination management, and marketing. He is a frequent speaker at academic and industry conferences. Moreover, he has over 300 academic publications, including 17 books. In addition to that, he has supervised 30 doctoral students to successful completion of their thesis. He is on the editorial board of 10 reputed journals, a member of the International Association of China Tourism Scholars, and a fellow of the Council for Australian Tourism and Hospitality Education. Last but not the least, he is a wonderful speaker, author, teacher, researcher, professional, and above everything, he's a great human being. So please help me in welcoming our guest, Professor Dr. Noel Scott. Welcome to the Kalwas platform, and thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Shah, and thank you to Kalwas for providing me with the opportunity to talk today. I'm particularly interested in this topic. Review articles is something that I have a real interest in, because I think it's very central. So very happy to talk today.
Thank you very much, Prof. It's a pleasure to have you with us. As a reminder to the audience that Prof. Noel Scott will be discussing and presenting, and then he would leave time for your question and answer session. Of course, if it is not covered in the session, and you can email us the question, or you can comment on the comment section, and we will definitely ask the Prof regarding this question. So over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shah. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now.
Sure,
just one second. Share screen. This one. Okay, so I think you can see my screen now. Is that correct?
Yes, Prof. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, this is where it gets exciting. So what I'm going to do today is talk about something which is central to academic research and sort of to being an academic. When you're an academic, you have to know your area of research. You need to know the literature, and you need to then make contributions to it. So in order to demonstrate your knowledge, often you will do a literature review to make sure that when you're doing your research, you are aware of all the relevant information, you have the correct, or you at least can provide a background justification for your research, for your theory, for your methods, and for your interpretation of results. So understanding the literature in a review is the beginning of a of any research project. Okay, so some people I know may decide to do some research, and they'll often collect some data, and then they try and provide some analysis of it, and then they try and work out what it means and to write a paper about it. But of course, that's the wrong way to do it. The right way is before you start any research project, begin by doing a literature review, identifying some sort of example papers that you're going to use as models for your paper, and also review the literature to try and find some sort of research question. Because you see, if I want to, if I'm a PhD student and I want to justify that I am doing a good PhD, I could come up with my own questions, and nothing wrong with that. And then I go away and collect my data against those questions, and then I write it up. And then I've got to justify why my conclusions and evidence are right. And the problem is, I may not have done a literature review beforehand, but if you do, and if you can find some sort of research question that Professor Shah has already identified, and in his areas for further research, he said, oh, any PhD student, you need to do some research in this area. Well, then it's easy to write and to collect your data and to do an academic paper, because you don't have to justify why you're doing that particular question. You can hide behind Dr. Shah, and no one's going to criticize you because it's your question. No, you don't have to worry, it's Dr. Shah's. So anyway, so one of the basic ideas of doing doing research is your literature review. And in this little diagram you'll see there, I show that the prior literature is a sort of a broad area, which is the beginning and end of any research project. So the beginning is to understand the prior literature and use that to frame your research questions and your methodology. And then your analysis and conclusions should contribute back to the prior or to the literature. The purpose of an academic, the purpose of academic research is to contribute to the body of knowledge. That's our purpose. That's why we're different from consultants. If you were a consultant, you would be using knowledge and doing the same study again and again and again to find out how practice is working and to apply that knowledge in a particular area. But an academic's different. An academic is a person who is, their aim is to provide advances in theory and methodology and understanding, which is new. Maybe they're testing prior theories. Maybe they're trying to develop new theories. Maybe they're testing methodologies or something. But the whole point is, if you have not made a contribution to knowledge in any academic paper, it should be difficult to publish. It may be difficult to publish. And that's the same for a research paper and a literature review. So that's a fundamental principle that I'll come back to during my talk. Okay, so what is a literature review? Well, it's some sort of paper, published material that provides an examination of the current academic literature. It can be, there's literature reviews on most things that you can imagine. And in fact, one of the, often when a PhD student or someone is talking to me and saying, well, I'm interested in this topic, the first thing I will do is try and find a review already written on that topic. Because you see, a review paper on a topic should provide a summary, it should provide the current status of knowledge, and it might even provide some indications of areas for further research. So you've got to make it easy for yourself. If you're beginning to look at the literature in a particular area, you don't have to start from the beginning, because many people have already reviewed your own topic. And so there will be, first of all, encyclopedia articles. Then there will be books on a particular topic. Then there'll be review papers on that topic and possibly different angles of it. And then, and if there's not a previous review on a topic, well, you've got to wonder what this topic's all about. You see, when you're doing your study, your research, you have to put your research in the context of some prior stream of knowledge. That's what you're contributing to. So if you don't find any prior reviews, then maybe you're thinking that this is not such a good topic. Or perhaps it's a topic which you have defined very narrowly, and in fact, there is a broad literature, but it's not in tourism, for example, or it's not in hospitality. So when you're beginning to do your research, you're trying to link your topic back to some stream of literature, to some theories and prior knowledge. And there is always some prior theories and knowledge that you can link back to. And if you're not able to link it back, you're doing something wrong, okay, because there will be some paper, some theory. Okay, so a review paper, the reviews that perhaps you're thinking of writing a review, like any paper, is not just a reporting of information. I'm the, I don't know how I became this, but I'm the literature reviews editor for Current Issues in Tourism. It's a good academic journal of tourism, hospitality. And I see maybe 2 literature reviews a week where people will write in. And there are 2 main problems that I see. Firstly, the paper is descriptive, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and not critical. It's not contrasting and comparing information. It's just describing it. And it's also then not ending by making some sort of theoretical, methodological contribution to knowledge. And therefore, I reject them. which is sad because obviously people have put a lot of work into them. So a literature reviews involve selecting, analyzing, and synthesizing prior literature to provide a contribution, as all academic papers must. They must do that. That's what distinguishes an academic paper. So here's a sort of a bit of a conceptual framework of what a literature review might try and do. So the problem, one of the problems I faced when I did my, before I came into academic life, I thought, hey, these academic guys are really smart. They must have all this knowledge neatly arranged, and if only I could find that information, I will be able to answer all my questions. And then once I started doing my PhD and starting to read, especially in, say, an area like psychology, applied in tourism, I found the whole thing's a mess. It's not organized at all. Everyone's fighting with one another, and they're disagreeing, and they're all writing about different topics, and some people say that they're wrong, and so the literature is like the top of this diagram. There's all sorts of different streams of literature, different foci, different disciplines being used, and so on. And that means when they're studying problems. And so the theory is a big mess. And what you have to do in a literature review is try and impose some order on it. There is no order except the order that you or other academics can agree on. And so that's your aim in doing a literature review. It's reviewing this mess of literature, and maybe, as you'll see here in the bottom, you develop some sort of conceptual framework which says, out of all this mess, it seems that concept 1 is related to concept 3, with concept 2 as some sort of moderating or mediating variable or something. So that would be useful. Why? Why is it useful? Well, you see, this is the beautiful thing about academic life. The purpose of making a literature review and adding to knowledge is that once you have done some research, well, first of all, when you're doing your research, and especially if you're looking for theories, you can rapidly absorb the knowledge of thousands and thousands of previous researchers who have identified concepts, defined them, developed topologies, developed relationships, developed theories, and they've been doing that for hundreds of years. And so by understanding what's been done before and then trying to develop some sort of theory, you are actually, it's like opening a treasure chest, because you see all these gems of wisdom that have been distilled by all the previous people. But of course, it's still a mess. And what you have to do is try and impose some order. And if you can do that, then you've just added another gem for someone else to read about, which is your contribution, right? So all these little contributions build up over time to a wonderfully amazing but confusing academic literature. So that's why when you start off doing a research problem, you read and read and read and make sense of what's happening, you analyze and synthesize the prior literature to develop your focus, and that's trading upon using the knowledge of all the people who have come before, which is wonderful. And once sometimes when I'm doing this process, I just feel that there's this precious knowledge that I've just had access to, mostly for free, that many people don't spend the time to understand. Now, it's not hard, it's not easy. Doing a literature review and understanding a particular area is hard, especially because it's, there's all sorts of different ideas and definitions and things. So don't expect it to be easy. Just expect it to be extremely valuable once you've finished. Okay, so a literature review then is the central part of academic life, I think, and it's the beginning of every research project, and also often people will be able to publish a review paper. And when I first started, I thought, oh, well, I know what a review is. It's what I would now call a narrative review. It's about me reading the stuff and putting some headings up and trying to analyze and come to some conceptual framework or something. But as I've learned, and of course, like any area of academic knowledge, once you start learning about it, you can go forever. You can become an expert on writing literature reviews or the topic of literature reviews, right? Because, and there are a number of people who have published in this area. Many people have. For example, this paper, 2009, Grant and Booth, they wrote a review paper on an analysis of 14 types of reviews and the associated methodologies. It was Health and Information Libraries Journal. Very good paper, because it talked about all these things that I'd never heard of. So they identified a number of labels for all sorts of different types of reviews: critical reviews, a literature review, which is a generic term, published materials that provide an examine of recent or current literature, may or may not involve comprehensive searching, may or may not include quality assessment, typically a narrative review, and we'll come back to that. And there are many different ways that you can structure it: chronologically, conceptually, thematically, and so on. So that's a narrative or a literature review is a generic term for a review of the literature, as you might expect. And there are many different types. We're going to talk a little bit about we're going to talk about two different types, or actually we'll probably talk about more, but we're going to talk specifically about systematic reviews and scoping reviews, but there are many other types. Meta-analysis is a very interesting sort of quantitative approach that statistically analyzes the effect size for particular types of studies. Very interesting. So there's those ones, and then there's rapid review scoping studies, scoping reviews, we'll talk about that, state-of-the-art reviews, systematic reviews, umbrella review. God, which one are we going to do? Well, let's just read what it says about scoping reviews. So, a scoping review, preliminary assessment of the potential size and scope of available research literature, aims to identify the nature and extent of research evidence. Okay. Now, so you see, a scoping review is what you would expect. Scoping means broadly gazing at a whole topic or some sort of group of keywords, perhaps we might say, to try and understand what the hell's been going on in there. Now, it's often broad, so and is subject to time and scope constraints. So a scoping review can be done in an afternoon. And it often is descriptive and not particularly analytical, or doesn't involve a lot of synthesis, because you can't, because you're just looking broadly across a whole area. So it might, if the first thing you might do if you're going to do some research in a new area is scope it out a bit. Try and work out, what I might do, for example, is I might go to Google Scholar and go to type in my topic with review and look for review articles published after 2017, say, to get an idea rapidly if there's some prior knowledge. And that will often reveal to me that I'm focusing too narrowly. That, you know, I once read a paper on a review of tourism on mountaintops. Okay, well, that's very good. But I would say that's too narrow a topic area for there to be a lot of theory. And so what I'm trying to do in an initial scoping study often is to find the theoretical areas that I can connect to. So let's say I'm doing a paper on social media, and I do a bit of a scoping study. I do some stuff in Google, and I find, oh, look, here's an article on it. And then I go and look at the theory in there, and I try and look at some keywords, and I try and see who's written about what discipline are they using? Are there any particular theories they're using, and so on? And that gives me some sort of connection to the literature. And then I try and identify some particular concepts that are being used, academic concepts with a definition that are connected to some theory. And that then takes me into a review that gets me started on the literature that I really want to look at. Okay, so a scoping study, broad, look here, look there, look there, look there, get a broad overview of the landscape, and perhaps try and identify 2 or 3 fertile areas for more in-depth investigation, perhaps. Might be one way of doing a scoping review. Systematic review is probably, it's become much more common these days. And I think that's because there's some feeling that by doing a systematic review, you are somehow doing something magical, and you're not. A systematic review really talks about the methodology of identifying the articles that you're going to review in your literature review. So what will often happen, perhaps after doing your scoping review, you will identify some theoretical areas or some topic area or some area of research that seems to be something that you're going to do some research in. So what do? Well, the idea is then that you will define some scope of some means of defining the scope of your study. You will perhaps identify a year range from 2010 to 2020. You might identify some keywords that you're going to look at because you've found those are representative of the area that you're looking at. And you will then, across some range of journals perhaps, identify all papers that meet those criteria. That's why it's systematic. It's systematic because you have identified the scope of your study systematically and are able to say, for example, that in 2001, there were 23 articles that met this criteria, and in 2010, there were 45, and so on. So you're able to compare across time, and hopefully in a impartial way. You're maybe trying to reduce bias by providing clear description of how you selected your articles. So that's good. You now have 2,485 articles on your topic. The problem is the systematic literature review doesn't really tell you how to proceed after that. You know the articles, but typically what you'll do is you'll start to characterize them in some way, sometimes by author, sometimes by year, sometimes by theme or topic or something. And this is where it goes wrong, okay? Because then people will think, oh, I'm finished. All I need to do now is report my findings. And my findings are how many papers were published each year over the past 20 years, the main authors, the main journals, the some sort of thematic analysis to say that there are 5 topics that could be identified, and perhaps they might even go and try and think about some areas for further research. And that's good. It's very interesting. I call that a bibliographic review. It's looking at the bibliographic details, that is author, year published, journal published, as well as some, and often people will do network analysis of co-citation analyses and things, and it all looks good, but it doesn't actually engage in conceptual or methodological analysis and synthesis, right? So what you end up with is a series of tables. Now, what I'm going to do, and I hope I'm not going to annoy anyone with this, but I found let's just see if this is the one. I just want to find a paper. I was looking at one tonight, which was a literature review. Let me see if this is the one. Ah, yes, here we are. So this is, I don't know if anyone knows Mr. Abdullah. I don't know, Dr. Shah, I don't know if you know Dr. Abdullah, so I don't know him, and I'm not picking on him in particular. This is just an example that I was able to find. But this paper is quite rightly called a bibliometric review, okay, which is good. And the question becomes, okay, it's quite clearly a bibliometric review. What is its contribution that makes it publishable? Right? Just because there's a bibliometric review and it's got lots of stuff doesn't mean perhaps we have to check to see if it's publishable. So let's have a look at it. So the first thing I do is look at the abstract, halal tourism. It's about halal. So they used in their systematic study the word halal, I imagine, And they found that the rate's increasing and the different research areas. Indonesian scholars have contributed 26.42 of the overall publications. That sounds interesting. Well, what does that mean? Keywords are Islamic tourism, Muslim tourism, halal, and really have substantially impacted the online search for information, right? Well, in this abstract, there is no contribution identified. This abstract identifies what has been found and what the authors did, and does not identify the new things that they have contributed to knowledge. So, not looking good. Let's now go on a bit, and you'll see, so we got typical, it's an important topic, what halal tourism is, okay, and so what their aim is to, what is their aim? Because like any type of study, a literature review should have an aim, right? So what's it say? Therefore, it is necessary to promote and to contribute to the knowledge needed to help the current research fund is to classify research as prolific resources, cited documents, co-author analysis. Well, those are all, that's like saying, in my analysis, I have done a matrix analysis, and I've done a SEM analysis, and thank you very much. It's telling me the analyses. It's not telling me what the results were that are new and different. So let's then go on a bit. Bibliometric analysis. Oh, yes, it was systematic. They seem to be, because they did the keyword of halal tourism. So this is sort of explaining exactly how they collected data, which is good. But just because they did that doesn't mean the results are any better. Publication trends. So here we go. Here's our first diagram. Things are going up. Actually, if you plot any graph of any topic in tourism and hospitality, you'll find it's going up like this. That's because the total numbers of papers published in tourism is increasing rapidly. So it doesn't mean anything. Analysis of research areas. Here we are. Oh, business and management, social science, economics. Well, really useful, is it? Majority of papers are in business and management. So what do we do with that information? Prolific sources. Quite naturally, you might imagine, Journal of Islamic Marketing is the main one. Management perspectives. That may be useful for someone in targeting another paper, but that's not a contribution to knowledge. That's a contribution to publishing. Most cited documents. Here we go. Oh, there's, so this paper, Batur and Ishmael, so it's you might call it a seminal paper, perhaps. Joan Henderson, Razak. So there's a few people there. Interesting. But what do I do with that information? I suppose I have to read those papers. So that's like saying, okay, here's a reading list, but that's not a contribution. It's helpful for other people so that they can make a contribution, but by itself, it's not a contribution. Main authors, yeah, H-index, yeah. Authorship analysis. Oh, this is interesting. Look at this. So you can do a very interesting co-citation analysis, I think this is, which is who writes with whom and who's connected to whom. And this guy is very central, but what am I going to do with that information? Okay, so institutions. All right, well, yeah, maybe that might be useful if you wanted to contact someone and find out what research is going on, but in itself, it's not a contribution. So I'm not saying that this information isn't useful. I'm just saying it's not useful in the academic sense of a contribution. Author, Country co-authorships, Indonesia and Malaysia. Yeah, that's good. Different countries, keywords. Oh, quite right. You might imagine. Okay, so that's what we've done. The conclusions. Here are our conclusions. The number of halal tourism publications increasing exponentially. Yeah, well, good. I might do some work in that area. It's business management, Journal of Islamic Marketing, main authors. So here is where we should see the contribution. At the end of this is the conclusion section. So this is where you add, oh, and by the way, I've done a really good thing. So the Bibliography, therefore, only publications. Okay, so all of that is just a repeat of what the person did. And then based on a bibliographic analysis, we'll be best able to recognize the importance of examining value. Well, good on you. The information provided is concise overview is envisaged to provide a concise overview of the future of halal tourism research. How do they do that? And so on and so on. And the references. And the references are usually good because they provide it. But do you see my point? My point is that these people have done a very helpful and useful thing, but without producing a contribution. And a review paper should make a contribution. So, getting back to our the topic of the of tonight. So, a scoping review, it's a preliminary assessment, probably not publishable. Okay, unless, and I would say that that one that we've just seen is sort of like a scoping review, or it's a systematic review with critical analysis and synthesis added. And that paper we just saw did analysis, but it wasn't critical and it wasn't there was no synthesis. So a systematic review is more than just a bibliographic analysis, which is what we just saw before. Okay, so what's the difference between an annotated bibliography and a literature review? An annotated bibliography lists a series of articles for each one. It gives a short summary of the relevant information for the project. The bibliographic analysis is a little bit different to an annotated bibliography. Annotated bibliography is just the paper with some notes underneath it. A bibliographic review is some analysis of the commonalities across those papers. A literature review leads the reader through a series of issues that are relevant to the project and discusses each one, giving references where necessary. So a literature review doesn't have to review every paper. You are identifying the key issues of importance derived from a critical analysis and synthesis. So you don't just repeat papers, and you certainly don't just list all the papers in a particular theme. That's just another form of counting. Okay, so a literature review starts with a question. And often you'll see this. So like any paper, a bad question. How many papers have been written in countries or universities or by different authors or on topics or using various theories? Or identifies research gaps. Now, identifying research gaps is an interesting thing to do and very useful, but you've got to remember that it's speculative. This is about something that you believe might happen in future. You may have a gap, but unless you've got research to show it's a gap and to show that it's important, well, it's just speculation, in my opinion. A good question might be, I wanted to develop a framework that multiple stakeholders can use as a reference to understand the contours of food waste in the food services establishments in educational institutions. I'm not so sure if that's a perfect question, but the idea is that it's about developing some framework, perhaps, hopefully, some conceptual framework based on an analysis of the literature that people haven't seen before, that might, based on these treasures and gems from the past, look at how food waste in food services could be studied, connecting it to prior literature, maybe. Some observations about when you're doing a literature review. I found this particular paper particularly interesting. It's called the Paradigm Funnel. And the Paradigm Funnel is a observation about the nature of literature in most topic areas or most streams of literature. Now, so no matter what stream of literature you're looking at, most papers are based on empirical observations, often atheoretical. So you might find that 35% of people going to China come from Japan. Very interesting. But as you go and start to analyze the papers, you'll find some papers have actually discussed the methods used to study a particular topic, and in fact may have identified some problems where two different methods are being used, and identified that there's some area for research there. Methods 1 says this, method 2 says this, same sample, and you get different results. What are you going to do? Well, do some research. Fewer papers might actually look at the theories being used to study a particular topic and find some problems. Maybe they'll find that everyone's studied different concepts, but no one's really developed a broad conceptual framework of the antecedents, a particular concept, and its consequences. Very useful thing to do in a literature review. Or they might have identified that theory A says this, theory B says this, and there's differences in the literature about what's happening. Why is that? And very few papers, but they're wonderful gems, may actually say, hey guys, we got it wrong. So an area that I think is interesting these days is to look at, which may be sort of questioning core assumptions of hospitality. There have been a number of studies, or a couple of recent papers, which have said this is what hospitality is. And they've tried to give an ontological definition of it. Wow, that's a core basis for any study. So if you want to study hospitality, you got to read that paper and think about it. In psychology, another thing that I go on about, no one listens to me, but I go on about it because most tourism papers use behavioral theories of psychology in their studies. For example, that's why we have lectures in consumer behavior, because when business schools were being set up, the business schools used the best theories of psychology they could use at the time, which come from behavioral psychology, and they started writing textbooks and doing marketing using those theories, and that's all the literature you see today because they haven't moved on much. Of course, back in the origin discipline of psychology, they have moved on. People no longer not many people do behavioral psychology. They do cognitive psychology, neuroscience, all sorts of interesting things, which are only starting to come into tourism. So one of the core assumptions of tourism is that you have to study tourist behavior, and I would question that core assumption. Interesting, isn't it? So an example of looking at the theories, the specific theories in use and their basis, the assumptions on which they're based, and questioning those core assumptions. Oh, good fun. So that's what academics do. That's wonderful stuff. Okay, so anyway, coming back, once you've how do you do analysis and synthesis? Well, it's a skill. It's a skill that you get better at over time. And unless you start struggling and trying to do it, you don't get any better at it. So it's a skill. And one way to begin, I mean, the essential idea of analysis and synthesis is to identify the characteristics, compare and contrast characteristics of each paper. So how do you do that? Well, one way is charting. This is a very simple chart, but the idea is that you read an article, familiarize yourself with it, and you might identify some themes or issues in the paper. Issue number 1. This is a behavioral psychology paper. Article number 2. Oh, it's also a behavioral psychology paper. Article 3. Oh, it's also, you start to notice that all the papers are. And that can be hard to realize because of you don't question that sort of thing. But anyway, but you might identify that this paper is about ecotourism, this paper is about wildlife tourism, this paper is about sustainability in tourism. And you start to compare and contrast how they talk about those issues. So issue number 1 is about ecotourism. Issue number 2 is about something, sustainability. And you start to notice that in the sustainability papers, they talk about slightly different things to the ecotourism papers. Oh, there's a difference. So that's contrasting and comparing. And if you do that with a table, and then you start thinking about it, and you start noticing regularities, perhaps you draw diagrams or you draw conceptual maps, and there is a bit of thinking and high-level skills that are needed at that point to do that analysis. Then you start to see, you start to develop a synthesis. That is, it appears that sustainability papers are different from ecotourism papers in that ecotourism talks about this, but sustainability papers don't. Okay, now that's one point that you from your analysis and synthesis that maybe is something you're going to talk about. And of course, you don't need, if you're talking about this particular area of analysis and synthesis that you've identified, you don't have to talk about every article. You might say, many of the papers in ecotourism talk about A, but the sustainability ones talk about B. So it's not that it's not about every paper, it's that there's a group of papers of one type or another that are different and share a characteristic. So the whole point of synthesis is that you're not talking about individual papers. You're talking about groups of papers, or you're talking about some new paper which is different from all the others, for example. Okay. So charting and tables and writing tables, it's a good way to start sifting and the material that you've got. So obviously, when you're doing a literature review, you've got to read it, familiarize yourself, get it into your head. And one of the interesting things about once you start to get it into your head and you started reading all these papers, eventually it makes sense. Wow, isn't our brain amazing? And how it works, I'm still not sure. I think it's just the way our brain functions. We're designed to make sense of our environment. And once we understand this literature, we start to make sense of it. But mapping, you can do these bibliographic methods, and it can be insightful. This one is by Pierre Benkendorf. Don't tell Pierre I was talking about him. You know, this is a good paper, but I struggle with what the contribution is. So here's another thing. Being critical about papers means just because it's published in a good journal doesn't mean it's perfect. That's the whole idea of being critical. So an academic doesn't say, oh, Professor Scott said it, it must be true. Hey. Instead, you say, oh, Professor Scott said it, he's a very intelligent person, but I wonder if he got it right this time. Maybe he didn't. So you can do citation analysis. That's very interesting. But this is the sort of stuff that might provide some theoretical contribution to library studies, perhaps, because you're looking at how areas develop, not just tourism. So perhaps, I'm not sure. Here is the results of a paper which begins to talk about things that I think authors should be interested in. So it starts to talk about the various theories that are involved, but unfortunately, it's still sort of counting or making a list. Here's the number of papers, still a list. Number of journals, still a list. But here we start to see some analysis where we're grouping types of papers together, sort of in a hierarchical or in a map. And here we start to see some conceptual framework. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if this is the best paper in the world. I just use it as an example of moving in the right direction. This stuff over here on the right, not so good. Stuff on the left, where you're looking at some sort of diagrams and conceptual frameworks, better. Contributions from a paper. The authors have made a novel contribution to the research on food waste reduction by identifying theme-based research gaps. Nope, not a contribution. Suggesting potential research questions. Interesting, not a contribution. And proposing a framework based on the open systems approach. Okay, that's a contribution. It's the first SLR to review food waste in food services. No, just because you're the first one doesn't mean you've done anything. Very nice. You could be the first one and it's the worst one. Another novel contribution of this study is that the gaps that we identified are theme orientated, paving the way. No, this is like the research gaps thing. Very, it's speculative. It may be that you've identified some interesting research orientated themes, but that's not proven. There's no evidence. All you know is that there are no papers on that topic. It doesn't mean that it's a useful area. Or certainly they haven't justified it in their contribution here. Okay, so there's lots of these things around, discipline-based reviews, psychology and tourism, marketing and tourism, political science, sociology. If you're getting into one of these disciplines, read some of these things. Many of them are outdated now, but they can give you a sense of how the literature has developed. Again, I think it's really important for you to understand how a discipline or an area does develop. So first of all, sorry guys, tourism is not a discipline. Tourism is a field of study where theories and ideas from other areas are applied. So they call it an applied field. Get over it. And so we get our theories from other disciplines. So you'll see here, I was explaining before, On the right-hand side, you'll see psychology, three main streams of psychology: introspectionism, behaviorism, cognitivism. In the psychology discipline, the ideas transferred to consumer behavior and business, primarily behaviorism, and it's continued to today. And in tourism and sport, we got our ideas from consumer behavior, so we're still in the behaviorism field at the moment. Well, useful way of thinking about the literature. Topic-based reviews, tourism and oil, innovation. Innovation is a topic, but it's also a concept. Tourism and oil is more of a thematic area. Film tourism, thematic area. Urban tourism, perhaps a concept, if you're a geographer. Urbanism. So lots of interesting reviews. How am I going for time? So I've talked about literature reviews. I've got some stuff now on doing the literature review. Shall I continue on, Dr. Shah, or shall I leave it there?
No, Prof. Continue, please. We are learning and people are enjoying your presentation and your explanation. Please go ahead. People want to listen to you, Prof. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Please.
Okay, so I'll go through this probably in about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll have some questions. So doing the literature review, this is where it's less of a well-defined process and where there are skills come in, right? So the more literature reviews you do, the better at it you get. But generally the process is a little bit of backwards and forwards and slowly sort of narrowing down. But you can't do a good literature review until you know the literature, which means you've got to read it. So that's why when you're doing research, try not to be too broad and connect to some theoretical stream of literature as early as you can, and then stick to that, at least at the beginning of your PhD or something. So narrow down to an area where there's a number of authors, at least 7 or 8 authors, writing papers, and there's debates going on. That's a sort of reasonable sized area to focus in on. If you try and do too broad, you've got too many papers to read. If you try and do too narrow, this is where you see some people grabbing an idea from psychology from 1980 and writing a paper as if that's the theory that's going to answer all the answers. Not good. So you're reading within some scope. Perhaps start by looking in an encyclopedia, then look to some book on the theme, because a book should, if it's a good academic book, identify all the ways that your topic has been studied, and then try and narrow down to a particular way of study. That's a stream of literature, right? So what you're trying to do in a literature review is to say a topic can be studied in a number of different ways. Let's say psychology, economics, politics, and I'm going to focus on one disciplinary area because it's hard to compare across disciplines. And then within this disciplinary area on that topic, we see these theories, and then you discuss perhaps the theories, and then you look at sub-theories or debates or something. Have some structure in your mind, and try and of course, a good way to start is to find a previous literature review, because that gives you at least a structure that someone else has used on that topic. Now, you don't have to use it, and often you might develop it, but it gives you at least some beginning themes to try and understand. And it also should allow you, like if the literature review that you're reading is from 2016, that usually means that all the literature from before 2014 has already been reviewed for you. So therefore, you can, if you want to do another literature review, you should refer to that one and then say, now I'm going to do the literature from 2015 onwards. How much time have you saved? Just by knowing that someone's already done a literature review. You've cut down 3/4 of the literature, and you've got a set of themes that you can try and hook into. So anyway, then you might, sometimes you do a scoping study to start with, then you might do a systematic literature review. You might even find that that one wasn't the right one, and you have to back out and go into a slightly different area. Do you look at the grey literature? The grey literature is commercial literature, very important in things like pharmacology or medicine, perhaps not so much in tourism. And then you start to get to the end where you're analysing and integrating, and you might start by looking at the history of the topic. List several key authors, look at some debates, look at methodology, theories and concept finding critiques, and as a result, write your first draft. Of course, you are going to write 6 more drafts, right? But getting your ideas down in your first draft is a good place to start. So as I said, be smart. Start with encyclopedias and books, review articles, and then start to read journal papers. If you jump into journal papers too early, you're going to just get confused because they all hate each other and they're all fighting with one another. Good thing to do sometimes is to do forwards and backwards reference searching. So you find a good paper, Scott 2018, wonderful paper, and then you go forward to 2000 and you see who's 2021, you see who's cited that paper. Oh, and you see the papers that I've cited. Oh, so that can fairly rapidly help you to identify the key authors in this area, and then you start to read their work. So forward reference searching, backwards reference searching, backward author searching. Find other papers that I have written, for example. Very useful. Google Scholar is wonderful for this, because if you can find an author, you can just look in Google Scholar and find out all the papers they've written. Then you go and, oh, look, he's written 10 papers. So usually in an area that you're going to study, there aren't 100 authors. There are probably 20. And that's important. And I'll come back to that. So sort of areas you might want to look at. Maybe you could start doing columns for each one of these topics or these things. Develop a research table. Develop a concept map, relating ideas together. Synthesize. So reassemble your notes and ideas. Often, you know, sometimes they use a wall, you know, post-it notes of stuff. Develop some categories. Start to begin to develop a topic outline. Develop a story, an argument, something that you think makes sense, but don't expect that that's the final idea, that this is a time of when things are changing. Writing it. So you've done your analysis, now you've got to write it. So you read, discover what's been written, understand the relationships, determine gaps and unanswered questions. Usually you start, actually, this is not quite right. This is how you write a normal paper. You start broad and then you narrow down to your research question. In a literature review, you've actually got one broad field and several areas of focus, right? So that's the difference between doing a literature review in your PhD, which comes up with one problem or question, and a literature review which comes up with several different areas that you're going to focus in on. I hope. Now, Dr. Shah, you will be using, do you use EndNote or Mendeley, or do you use some bibliographic software?
Yes, Prof. I use the EndNote, Prof.
God bless you. That's my favorite.
Wonderful, yes.
It's very useful, but I just use that because it's free at the universities in Australia, so
Yes.
it's expensive, but there's 1,000 of these things now. Just use one and use it from the beginning of your study. Don't try and, like, when I was doing my PhD, I got to reference number 400 and then realized that I needed EndNote. And so I had to go back and enter 400 into EndNote.
So wonderful.
Well, yeah, so it's very useful, and it makes it. There's a whole lecture you could do just on EndNote or these things, making it easy, integration with Google Scholar, all sorts of different things. Writing strategies. The first thing I say to people when they're beginning to write is be systematic. When I first started, I used to think I needed to have an idea in my head before I started writing. Now it's the opposite. Now I sit down and start mucking around, and I eventually, that's, and that's when I get my ideas. So establish a place where you're feeling comfortable. Always sit down in that quiet place. Sit in front of a computer or have your notepad or something, and always sit there. And your body becomes attuned to it. Your body starts to say, oh, here I am. I'm sitting in front of my computer. It must be time to do work, rather than waiting till you feel like it. And do it quickly. Don't try and have all that. Just jot down ideas and make notes and things. So I always, I say to people, when are you going to do that? And they say, oh, I'll try and do that for you in 2 weeks. And I say, okay, next Tuesday. Right? And it forces people to start, because that's the hard part. Once you start, so establish a few regular places. Don't do anything else there. Don't play games. Don't read books. Try and avoid, wasting your time. Try and avoid minimum noise distractions. Maybe make a list of the things that you're going to do today, and so on. There's lots of different ideas you can do. But here's the other thing. Whenever you're writing, whether it's a literature review or anything, write as if you're talking to someone, right? So this is what they call the invisible college. The several people around the world who are interested in what you're interested in. Okay. Now, usually, like in some of the areas that I deal with, such as neuroscience and tourism, there are around there's quite a few people in China, but outside China, there's 2 laboratories, 4 or 5 main people, right? And I know them. And I've often tried, just the other day, I wrote to one and said, would you contribute to a book I'm writing? So they're the people who you should be trying to make contact with. The few people who are interested in your topic. And if you know them, and if you know what you've written, remember they are the people who are probably going to be reviewing your journal article. So be nice to them. If you're writing a paper on neuroscience and tourism and you say, there are a few people around who are interested, but that Noel Scott guy, he's bad. Then when I get it as a reviewer, I will start off with a sort of a little cross beside your name. But if you say in that paper, oh, there are a couple of people around the world who are doing interesting things, and Noel Scott has published this paper and this paper and this paper, you get a big tick to start with. Right? Now, that won't work for everyone, but if you really know your topic and you know the area that you're writing in, then you're nice to those people, and all of a sudden you start to notice that your papers are more readily accepted. Strange, isn't it? Okay. Listen before you speak. You don't say, look, I've got a really good idea, or, all that stuff that all you people have done, it's all wrong, and here's the right idea. Don't do that. Be smart. And you say, look, there's been lots of interesting research in this area, da-da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da-da, and there's another little area over here which I think might be useful, and I'm going to talk about it. Connect with points already made. So you've got to be able to show people, which is where the literature review comes in, that you know what's already been written. Add to the conversation in a way that quickly grabs people's attention in some way, right? And be polite to these people in the invisible college. Maybe you want to develop a program of research, because I tell you, one of the things about doing a literature review is that it takes time. It might take you, and you've got to read all these papers. So if you read all those papers for this topic, and then decide to do a paper on a completely different topic, you've got to do another literature review. So that's why people tend to stay in one area and write a sequence of papers, because it's easier. So, and it's easier to get to the stage where you know the literature and you can see areas and gaps. Grab opportunities for talking to people in your invisible college at conferences, with visitors. Volunteer to review articles in your area. So you've got to know your area. I asked Dr. Shah. He said, yes, I'm in HR. Very good. That tells me a lot about the sort of papers and things that Dr. Shah would be interested in. Huh? And I suppose, please, I'm speaking for you now, Dr. Shah, I apologize, but you might be doing reviews on articles in the HR literature, huh? Because that means that you're keeping up to date. You're reading in an area that you're interested in, you can contribute more because you know it, and you're also being reminded or learning new things. Makes sense. So don't review every paper. Try and put a scope on the papers that you're interested in. Use conferences to build your network, trial articles for conference papers, and so on. So there are some references on the topic of literature reviews. It's a big area, not just in tourism. Many of these papers on writing good literature reviews are in business or other areas, and there's books and there's all sorts of things. So if you want to be good, get good on literature reviews, there's plenty of other things to read, and I encourage you to do it. Thank you. So that's my talk, Dr. Shah. I'll stop sharing the screen now.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Prof, for such a wonderful presentation and superb content. Prof, I love the way you started, and how did you start telling about the research questions and then to the literature review. But I loved your part, and I got a lot of comment regarding the contribution part, that you have mentioned it very well, and you have cleared a lot of doubts regarding the contribution. Most of the time people do that, and that's the beauty of when we talk to the expert. Since you have been doing a lot of review for the reputed journals, so you know it, how to evaluate the contribution properly, and from that perspective you have told us and you have shown us very much with the reference, which what normally researchers they do. You talk with the reference that yes, now look at and what is the contribution and what could not be considered as contribution, but there are misconceptions regarding the contribution. And really I love that thing. and so many new things I learned from you, even though I have gone through the PhD things, but they call it's the learning process. And research is not the destination, it's the journey. We always keep on learning new things. So
Exactly.
I love the way you explain the role of psychology and their theories, and now we have moved towards the neuroscience. Yes, of course, a lot of research is going on through the neuroscience, and they have connected with the business management and tourism and all these things. It was so wonderful, Prof. And believe me, I was so enjoying, I was so engaged in your presentation and explanation, all these things. And I was thinking that I wish you could have been my co-supervisor for my PhD, because you could have told me a lot of stuff in advance before going through that hectic journey, but a lovable journey. So, Prof, one thing I would like to mention that when we got admission in University of Malaya, Malaysia, they gave us the one reading course, and then we had to pass it with the writing a proper literature review document. So, Prof, whatever you said, we have gone through in this course, and it was so wonderful. It was just like the recap of everything which you were discussing.
Mm,
And I
mm,
could relate my memories to it, that yes, now look, Prof is explaining this part, now Prof is connecting this thing with this thing. So, particularly the synthesis part of it was so wonderful, Prof. The superb content, the superb explanation, Prof. Really, you are the gym, you are the leader, and that's why people they have emailed us, they have requested for you to please invite the Dr. Scott, just because they knew that you are the person who has a lot of knowledge and wisdom, and you prove it. Thank you very much once again for such a wonderful session. It was so wonderful. Prof, we have certain questions for you, and some
please.
of our PhD student, they want to clarify certain issues, and they want your guidance regarding that thing. So let me just ask the first question, which you have already mentioned very well, but please help the student. The student wants to ask the question that, Prof, I'm conducting this literature review. So please help me. How can systematic review be used in area with low literature or little literature for policy recommendation? Yes, please. Your recommendation to that student, please.
Mm. Um, yeah. So look, this is a problem in some countries. We're very lucky in Australia, and in people, in universities in Australia and America and Europe, um, in their access to the journals. The universities spend a lot of money on most journals. When I was at the University of Queensland, they had all the journals. Whatever you want. So um, I think the first. I don't know if in India, for example, you have access to Google Scholar, um, but that's certainly one way to start. Is to because so in Australia, when I search on Google Scholar, often it links me to an article that's been archived by the author in their institution, so you can get a sort of a version of the paper prior to publication. So these days, there's a lot more articles around than there used to be. But not all of them, and probably less for some of the big journals. What else can you do? Well, it's a fundamental problem. Maybe Dr. Shah, you might have some ideas. You might have some better ideas about accessing literature in India. Do you think?
In Pakistan, Prof, what we do is actually we connect to the Google Scholar, and we used to have the different databases, and we ask our different student advisor, the professors, to help us in that particular area, because they know they are the guru, they are working on the latest articles, and they are aware of the big names in that area. So we usually recommend, and we look after the of our supervisor, our advisors, to help us the people who are in the game of that research and that area. So and of course what you mentioned is the first thing, that is the Google Scholar. We connect with that thing and we go personally to that author, because that author works with the co-authors, and these co-author may have published separately with the same area with the same topic. So usually we do these kind of things.
I did come across another way, and I'm not sure if it's possible in India. In Indonesia, the National Library has a system where other people from the country can get articles through there. And I didn't know about it, but someone else from Indonesia was telling these people about it. So there are ways around connecting to people who you might know in another country. To get one or two articles is sometimes useful. If you do it well, sometimes writing to the author might enable them to send you a paper, but try not to do that too much. Just and be very polite as well, and explain why you need, and give them a sense that you haven't just decided to write. You've read a lot of papers and then you're writing. So, because there's nothing worse than just a PhD student writing to you and saying, hey, can you help, please? It sort of shows, because a PhD student has to become an independent scholar. So just asking someone else to do the work for you is not the way to go. In terms of policy, I wrote a paper on tourism policy. It's dated now, it's 2014. But I'd be happy to share that with you if you like.
Yes, please.
I'll type my. I don't know how I can write in the chat. But can you add to the chat for me, Dr. Shah? Maybe it's my email address, or can I do that?
Prof, we will give the link of email address for the viewers. They can contact you then.
Okay, yeah, good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Prof. We have another question for you, Prof. That can I do a systematic review and meta-analysis focusing on publication bias? Yes, your view on that, please.
Normally, a meta-analysis is something where people have already done a study and got some quantitative estimates, of a correlation coefficient or something, and you find the correlation coefficients across 20 studies, and then you try and work out for similar types of studies what effect size might be generally found, for example. Now, if you're studying publication bias, I'm not sure if that's suitable for meta-analysis, but it's certainly a suitable. It would be an interesting bibliometric study. I'm not sure what your question is. So what is the question that you're trying to answer that is relevant to tourism studies from this?
This is the general question from the student, that can they have a publication bias related systematic review? Can they write it? Is it a good idea? And can they publish it? They just want to ask that question, please.
I don't think it's it may be, but I don't think it's suitable as a literature review. I think that you could do a study on publication bias that is, for example, if a paper is written by a female author, is it more likely to be cited by women authors, for example? That would be a possible study. So that would be an example of publication bias. I'm not sure what specifically about the bias you're interested in, but yes,
Yes.
but it's more like a research study rather than a literature review, I think.
Yes, very nice insight you have provided, Prof. And that's what this is the just question we have received from one student, because they have not elaborated exactly what biasness they are looking for. But you have given a very nice analogy and nice example of that female author article that could be read more by the female. So that could be a kind of biasness, and this gentleman needs to send us the question in detail, then we can guide them very well. So we will provide your email address so they can interact with you later on to get more insight on that. Thank you very much, Prof, for such this wonderful answer. Another question, Prof, is very a naive question, but very interesting as well. Is that the one student wants to ask that what is the minimum number of articles to include in scoping review? What do you recommend to that, please?
Well, there's a couple of ways you could answer that. You could look at it from the point of view of the papers that you're going to collect and read, or the number of papers that you're going to reference in a journal. Okay. Now, I mean, it's always interesting to try and read as many papers as you can. But what I think is the more papers you read and try and report in your literature review, the more the standard declines. So I think you shouldn't, I mean, if you're saying that you've read 1,000 papers and you're doing a literature review on those, it's hard to imagine you're going to come up with a very insightful paper. It's just too much to do. So in a scoping review, so remember, a scoping review by itself is probably not publishable. If you think about a scoping study as being one that's just looking and unlikely to be doing a lot of analysis and synthesis. Okay, so scoping study, it's a little bit like exploring the Amazon for gold. There's a lot of jungle out there. What's your strategy? Maybe you could sample 100 papers or 50 papers or 30 papers. Maybe you're going to pick the most cited papers, read those, and then decide what you're going to do next. That would be a good scoping analysis, which is going to lead into a systematic or narrative review, which you might then publish.
Yes, Prof. Very nicely said once again, Prof. And that's the beauty of the when you talk to the expert, they could relate the things very well, and then they answer with the justification as well. Yes, the scoping review is again to get the insight what is happening, what you have mentioned as it's the horizon, and you will explore the things. And it's not publishable. It just shows you what information, what knowledge is there. So very nicely said once again. There is one another question which is again most of the time there is a misconception regarding that thing, that Prof, they want to ask that in a systematic review, do selected papers need to have similar outcomes and similar titles and focus? Yes, please.
In a systematic review, you normally select them on the basis of some commonality, whether it being the keywords, usually it's keywords actually, or keywords in titles and abstracts and keyword lists. That's normally how they do a systematic review selection process. But when you're reporting those results, yes, you're perhaps grouping subsets of those papers together, you're contrasting, comparing between different groups of papers. And then I want to reinforce the fact that you don't then have to list every paper. You
Mhm.
might say, in this group, there's a series of papers which are discussing this issue, and that can be contrasted with the way these papers work. And you give some examples. And you don't have to use or quote every paper.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's useful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very nice insight again. Wonderful, Prof. And most of the question, Prof, you have already covered in your superb content and wonderful presentation. For example, they wanted to ask that what are the benefits of publication of systematic review? What is the meta-analysis? What is the difference between systematic review and meta-analysis? All these things you have cleared it. One last question I would like to ask quickly, that what is the difference between rapid review and systematic review? A naive question, but your words matter a lot. That's why I have asked this question, so that it could clear the doubt of the students. Yes, please.
So a rapid review. I mean, there's many terms. It sounds like a rapid review is similar to a scoping study,
Yes.
something which you do to explore. Um, you identify where the mountains are and where the swamps are and you get a picture of the whole area before you decide to focus on this part of the territory. So rapid review is of that type, I would imagine.
Yes, Prof. Very nicely said once again, Prof. I would say that really I enjoyed the session with you. I learned a lot personally from you, and you are the Jim. You are the leader. What you have been doing, your contribution to the world is very much visible. The way you connect the things, the way you have explained the thing, speaks for itself. That yes, your academia experience as well as the industry experience have met us in such a way that we now understand things very much clearer in a better way. And that's the contribution of the expert, that they make the things in a simplified way so that everyone could understand easily. And Prof, you have rightly mentioned in your presentation that yes, literature review is the very much important thing. Yes, of course, everything starts with the literature review. We try to figure out what is happening in the field, and how did the different theories they impact, and what is the new thing, and all these things. And literature review will tell us what is actually happening in the field. So all these things are again very much important. And the particularly the guidance which you have provided is wonderful. And that's guidance is something we have learned through very hectic process, but through this 1 hour webinar you have given a wonderful guidance and insights which the experts they always look for. We learn through trial and error process, and the guidance which you have given is a wonderful, and they will learn from your experiences and from your wisdom and knowledge. And that is the beauty, and that is the contribution back to the society. That yes, of course, we have gone through the hectic process, but we are making it easy for you, and we are here to help out you, and we are extending helping hand in order to so that you can become a good researcher, a good productive member to the society. A wonderful. In the last, Prof, I would like to thank, and I would like to ask your concluding remarks. And what is your message to the world as teacher, researcher, author, trainer, professional, and professor? Yes, please.
Hmm. Well, okay. Just firstly, I see Madura from Sri Lanka is listening. He's from Sri Lanka, is an academic, and I know him well, so I'll wave to
Yes,
Madura.
thank
Um,
you very much.
what do I think in sort of in summary? Well, so as if you want to be an academic, you need to learn and practice how to do a literature review. That's the first thing. Secondly, I strongly agree with what you said, Dr. Shah, that uh, I don't know how you ended up as an academic. I've worked in business, but I've always had an interest in answering questions and things. I don't know why. It's just the way I am, and so I think the key thing for people is to find that area that they're interested in, and that they feel some sort of passion about. And if you can find that area, then it makes it far easier to, if you're interested in a topic, it makes it far easier to do well in it. So look for the areas that you're interested in, try and demonstrate to people that you have that passion, and that will like, it's funny, academics are supposed to be very stiff, but I think that usually if you get an academic talking about the area that they're interested in, then this interest comes out, and you start to see some. And so that's what you want to try and do. Find an area of passion, and then communicate that passion to the people who also share that interest with you. And if you can do that, then it'll be good. Apart from that, write a literature review. Do, if you can, start to review papers. Because if you want to review if you can review papers for journals, you're sort of learning how to write at the same time as you're learning how to critique papers. And PhDs, best years of your life, hard years, but when you look back on them, you will perhaps think that they were the best years of your life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. A wonderful message that look after your interest and passion. And again, yes, Prof, I 100% agree with you that PhD life is and PhD years are the best life of our lives. It was wonderful time, no doubt. It was a very difficult. We struggled a lot. I cried a lot most of the time, but that was the beauty, because through this way I learned a lot. And I really enjoyed with my friends going to the different states and having a lot of gossip with them. Even on dinner and lunches, we were discussing research methodology, research question and objectives. So it was a wonderful time, and I really enjoyed it a lot, along with the difficulties as well. And that was a enjoyable journey. I would strongly recommend to the people that yes, of course, go for a PhD, pursue higher education. It is a enjoyable and lovable journey. You will love it. And really, Prof, thank you very much for being what you are, and the way you speak is wonderful. And what you said, yes, there is a kind of perception that educationists are academics, they are very stiff and thing. But when we see people like you who are so humble, who are so kind and so wonderful, then the people start thinking that yes, people like you are contributing well. You people like you are enjoying and make things very easy for people and inspiring us. That is the most important thing. I inspired a lot what you said, and I'm your student. I have been following you, and I will keep on following you. And I like your one of recommendation that be a reviewer to the journals. Through this way, you will learn a lot. So again, it was a so learning session with you, Prof. Thank you very much for your time and for your knowledge, wisdom, and everything. In the last, I would say that indeed literature review is very important. As we say that research starts with the literature review. Through literature review, we know what is problem statement, what are the research gaps which we are going to fill, which methodologies were used, and which one is more appropriate, and what were the previous findings, what were the conclusion, and what would be your conclusion. So I strongly recommend that please do follow the distinguished guest speaker through his research work, and you can email him for future learning and guidance. He is very generous and is always ready to help the people, particularly the young researchers as well. So, moreover, wonderful explanation, powerful content, which the great speaker has already elaborated to you. Try to learn more from it and develop your understanding regarding what is the literature review and what is the proper literature review. So take advantages of all the information, important tips, suggestions shared by the experts. So that's all we have time for today's session. Thank you once again to Professor Dr. Noel Scott for your wonderful time, suggestion, everything. Moreover, I would like to thank our audience who join us. If you have any additional questions about the information shared today, please email to us, or you can directly connect to the speaker through his email address or the social media account. Thank you all for your support and liking our sessions. Stay tuned as many sessions are on the way. Please do not miss any session. Till next session, take care of yourself. Bye bye.